I'm building a 1/12 scale miniature model of a Sears Craftsman kit house. I'm going to be working on the kitchen cupboard, which will be located in the kitchen pantry. I'm building the kitchen cupboard out of a scrap piece of 2x4. I'll put a link in the description so you can check out the beginnings of how I started this project. I'm going to be using some popsicle sticks to create the base trim for the cabinet. The trim will be attached at the bottom of the cabinet like this. The trim at the front of the cabinet needs to be twice as thick as the trim on the sides of the cabinet, as it will be overhanging a bit on each side of the cabinet, and I don't want it to break easily. I'm going to be gluing 2 popsicle sticks together to make the trim twice as thick. I'm going to be using some wood filler to fill the wood joints. I did a video about filling and painting your miniature wooden projects. I'll put a link in the description as well as a link at the end of this video, so you just need to click on it if you want to check it out later. I used the popsicle stick as a putty knife to fill in the cracks. I used a very fine sanding sponge to remove the excess filler from the wood joints. There was a bit of excess filler in the corners here, so I carefully removed it using an X-Acto knife. Project's looking pretty good. I used my shop vac to clean up the fine dust particles of wood filler. This is important because when you start painting the project, you want to make sure you have a clean surface without any of these dust particles. You want to get a nice smooth paint surface on your project, so you don't want any dust particles messing it up. When I checked the popsicle stick I'd glued together the day before, I discovered that the popsicle sticks weren't exactly straight, and the popsicle sticks didn't glue together properly. I'll have to redo this. I re-glued 2 more popsicle sticks together and securely fastened them with some clamps to make sure that the popsicle sticks glued together properly with a nice tight bond. I started to design the front baseboard of the cabinet. If you look at the base of this cabinet, you'll see that it has decorative curves on the bottom of the cabinet. I want to replicate something similar on my miniature kitchen cabinet. I got to work drawing out my vision of the cabinet. It's always a good idea to make some sketches of your project before you actually start building them. Keep your shapes simple. Remember, you want to keep your shapes symmetrical. And you'll have to cut all these shapes out later, which can be a lot of work, a lot of filing, and a lot of sanding. I taped the popsicle stick, which will be the baseboard of the cabinet, on the front of the cabinet. I trace the back of the popsicle stick so I can see the portion of the popsicle stick that I can't cut out and that I can't include in my curves and design. I put together some simple designs on my paper and I found that it would be easier to draw the shapes freehand onto the popsicle stick. I colored the areas of the popsicle stick that I need to remove and cut away. This is a handy trick so you don't make any mistakes. Using my bandsaw, I made some cuts into the wood on the wasted side of the popsicle stick. You can see here the cuts that I made into the popsicle stick. I'll now cut away these bits. This will make it easier to trim and shape the wood to the final design. Here you can see the piece of wood, and I've cut out all the excess wood not included in my design. You can either sand the wood down or use a small file, or do what I'm doing. I'm using the attachment from my Dremel tool and putting it into my drill press. If you have a clamp to fasten your wood down, you can use your Dremel tool to do this as well, or perhaps you even have a stand for your Dremel tool. I put the sanding attachment into the chuck of my drill press. I placed some parchment paper onto the table of my drill press because the drill press is made of metal and it's kind of oily and I don't want to get my piece of wood dirty and stained. I'm using some clamps to hold down the parchment paper because it's difficult to use painter's tape on parchment paper. It just doesn't stick properly. I adjusted the table so that the sanding wheel was just above the table. Always check to make sure that the sanding wheel or your drill bit moves freely within the center hole of your table. I gently smoothed off the rough edges, making sure to hold my piece of wood firmly down on the table. I gently smoothed off the rough edges, making sure to hold my piece of wood firmly down on the table. You want to keep a tight grip on your project so it doesn't get grabbed by the sanding wheel and pulled out of your hands. Here you can see the finished base trim. I'm now going to try and round the top edge a little bit using some sandpaper. This will just take the harsh squareness away from this piece of wood, giving it a little bit more of a finished appearance. I used some wood glue and spread it evenly on the front legs of the cabinet, and I carefully positioned the front base trim to the cabinet. Using a single thick piece of popsicle stick, I cut some pieces for the base trim on the sides of the cabinet. I'm going to use a piece of craft wood which I purchased at the dollar store to create the door and drawer fronts for the cabinet. I trimmed the wood using my bandsaw. I purposely cut the wood slightly too big. I'm going to be using my belt sander to trim these small pieces of wood down to their finished size. You can see the piece of wood fits nicely where the front doors of the cabinet will be. These doors won't be functioning, they're going to be glued in place. I have the pieces of wood cut to size, and this is how it's going to look in the pantry. I need to cut the pieces of wood for the doors in half and the drawer fronts as well. The two doors need to be the same size, but the drawers can be slightly different in size. The bottom drawer is probably going to be slightly larger. It probably would have been used to hold bread. And the drawer would have been lined with tin to keep the mice out. I carefully mark a line in the middle of the piece of wood that will become the door fronts. Using the belt sander, I tapered the edges of these pieces of wood that will form the drawers and doors. This will add a bit more detail and interest to the model. Here you can see how the cupboard doors and the drawers look in the kitchen cabinet. I'm using some acrylic paint here to paint the cabinet. I purchased the paint at the dollar store. It was cheap, and the quality's pretty cheap too. The color's a bit more yellow than I would have preferred. Actually, I hate the color. I would have preferred a softer yellow. However, the price of the paint was right. It was only $1 a bottle, compared to buying a sample can of paint, which probably would have cost me about $8. I could have mixed the paint with a bit of white, but then it would be hard to match, and I have to paint the cupboard over several sessions. I had to give the cabinet 4 coats of paint. This is the disadvantage of using cheap paint from the dollar store compared to buying sample cans from the hardware store. That's one of my tips and tricks in the video that I'm going to be linking at the end of this video, so you'll just need to click on it. Hey, if you're enjoying my video, please hit the like button and maybe even consider subscribing. As a new YouTuber, it really helps me out. Maybe even leave a comment and let me know what you think of my kitchen cabinet so far. The YouTube algorithm really loves it when you do that. It'll help me get my video out there so I can reach the 1,000 subscriber level so that I can get my YouTube channel monetized and maybe even make a bit of ad revenue, and then I'll be able to afford better paint and better colors. The next step was to glue the doors on the cabinet. You'll notice that I wrote on the back of the doors which is the top and which is the bottom. This is really important to make sure you get the doors to fit properly. You don't want to glue them in the wrong spot and then find out they don't fit properly. And there you have it. The door fronts and drawer fronts have been attached to the cabinet. And there's the video I told you about earlier, the one that gives you my painting tips and tricks. Just give it a click and check it out. We'll see you in the next video.